Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my December wrap-up, and I read 5 books in the month of December, which I think is pretty decent. I was fairly gentle with myself the last 2 weeks of December, and when I say gentle, I mean that I barely did any reading. The plan had been that during the 2 weeks off, my first real vacation since my trip in summer of 2019 when traveling was a thing, I had planned to read and read and read and read and read, and instead I slept and binge watched a whole bunch of movies. So despite that, I was able to read some really fabulous books that I'm going to talk to you about today, so why don't we just dive right into it. So, the first book that I want to talk about is The Night Watch by Sarah Waters, and if you watch my channel, you know that I stan Sarah Waters, and I stan her hard. Her book Fingersmith was one of my top reads of 2020. This is a World War II historical fiction, and I know that there is a glut in historical fiction on World War II, but I'm a sucker for World War II historical fiction. So the book is about 4 individuals, Duncan, Viv, Kay, and Helen, and how their lives intersect over the course of 6 years. And what's really interesting and innovative about this book is that the book actually is going backwards in time. So you start in 1947, you then jump to 1944, and then you jump again to 1941. I have always spoken about the fact that Sarah Waters does atmosphere like no other, and that was very much the case. These are all individuals living in London. You can feel the vibration of the bombs, you can taste the sulfur, and you can feel the fear, you can feel the adrenaline rush, you can feel the bravery at points. There's just so much going on, which seems so appropriate given that wars are chaos, and so there had to be a lot of that going on during that time as well, but you also had people having to go about their daily lives under these very difficult circumstances. I also always talk about with Sarah Waters are her plot twists, and this book I would say is a little bit quieter than those of The Paying Guest and certainly of The Fingersmith, but that's because the plot twists here, those aha moments, are actually those moments where you find out how these 4 people actually intersect within the 6 years. So that's what it is. It's about the relationships. Regardless, I still think that it is really, really well done. I would say, like with any other Sarah Waters book that I have read up until this point, that it is definitely a slow burn. It starts out slower, but the payoff is well worth it. I love the fact that it has these wonderful LGBTQ storylines. I love the fact that it is looking at social issues that I haven't really seen explored in other World War II historical fiction that I've read, like being a conscientious objector or being queer in London during that time. So that was really refreshing and different, and what I think really made it stand out from the rest of the oversaturated World War II market. I gave this a 4 stars, and I think it's just because I'm used to having those really big plot twists, and as I said, this was not that, but it was still really enjoyable. The next book is a bit of a pivot because now we're talking about a classic, and that classic happens to be Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This was a reread for me. I read it for the first time when I was 15. This time I read it as part of a buddy read with Katie from over at Katie Reads and Rants. This has always been one of my favorite books, and I'm always weird about saying that because I feel like it makes me sound a bit like a pompous ass. This is the book that triggered my love of Russian literature, is probably responsible for why I actually went on to study Russian history. It is largely about Anna Karenina, this wife of a Russian civil servant who ends up having an affair, and the fallout and all of the scandal that comes from that. It also is the story of two other interconnected families. We're gonna get this out of the way. Do I think that this is an easy book to read? No. Do I think that it is as intimidating as most people seem to feel about it? No. I mean, yes, it is nearly 800 pages. Yes, it is Russian literature and therefore a little bit dense, and it's also Leo Tolstoy. But this is really a book that is about everyday people going about their everyday lives and all of the things that make the human experience beautiful. Marriage, children, relationships, also the things that make families stressful. Divorces, affairs, money problems, differences in ideologies. It's all there and it all feels so real, and I think that's why this book is still so powerful for so many people, and it really is kind of like a time capsule of what life in Russia at this time would have been like, because it does talk about culture and society and politics and all of that. It's all interwoven and makes you just realize how much of a genius Tolstoy himself must have been, but that all just adds a layer and a texture to this work that I don't think you really see in much contemporary works of fiction. That's all to say that this was a 5-star read for me. Obviously, I loved it enough the first time to want to reread it, and I don't think, if anything, the value of this book to me has grown now on the second reading, now having the life experience that I do, and also having that history background focusing on Russia, but I don't think that's necessary in order to enjoy this book, because, as I said, it really is about the familial relationships more than anything. So I really think that is what makes it relatable. So if you are hesitant about dipping your toe into Russian literature, don't know where to start, maybe with Leo Tolstoy, this would be the first book that I recommend, because I do think you will understand his genius and want more. So we have another pivot, and that's with The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I don't read a ton of romance, but I've been kind of dipping my toes into the water a little bit more since reading The Kiss Quotient. The story itself, which I listened to as an audiobook, is about Olive and Ethan, who are the maid of honor and best man at their siblings' wedding, when everyone else at the wedding gets horrifically sick with some severe case of food poisoning, which means that Olive and Ethan are the ones who go on the honeymoon together, and while on this trip, this honeymoon, they have to pretend to be newlyweds, and since this is a romance, you know where this is going. I did actually think that this book was enjoyable. There was a lot of humor, and Olive as a character is very clever and witty and relatable, which I liked. I liked that aspect of it. That being said, I did have my issues. This is what I believe is meant to be an enemies to lover plot, but I didn't buy into it. There are a lot of moments where Olive describes Ethan as her arch rival or arch nemesis or something like that, especially towards the beginning of the book. And it's a lot of telling and not a whole lot of showing me that they are actually enemies. It really felt more to me that they enjoyed being snarky to one another and taking the piss out of one another, but not necessarily that they had any real reasons to consider themselves enemies. Another issue that I had was that I did feel that certain elements of it were a little bit too contrived for my liking. You know, going into a romance that there's a bit of a formula. You know there are two people who are going to have the hots for each other. You know that over the course of the book there are going to be impediments to them expressing their feelings, having sex, saying I love you, but then you know by the end that all of that has been resolved and they're happily ever after. And that's fine. That's what you want when you read a romance. I don't like it when things feel like they could be easily resolved and just weren't for the sake of creating drama. But that's not even the thing that bugged me the most. The thing that bugged me the most was that there was no steam. Christina Lauren, the writing duo, does fade to black. And I think what's even more frustrating is that Olive and Ethan then continue to refer to their amazing sex, and it's a case of telling and not showing, and I'm kind of sitting there like, but can something? And I think that was probably one of the most frustrating things about this book. So I did end up giving this book 3.5 stars. It was just okay for me. I wasn't blown away as I've been with other romance books that I've read recently. The next book is also a romance, but it is historical romance, and that is A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore, which is the second book in the A League of Extraordinary Women series, which follows this group of suffragettes living in Victorian England. And I read the first book over the summer at the recommendation of my friend Liz, and she actually gave me this book as part of my A Friend Picks My Books, which I'll link that video in the cards for you. This isn't a sort of book that you're going into looking for a ton of historical accuracy or anything like that. This is what I would call a cotton candy book, that it's delicious but doesn't have much nutritional value. But some books you just want to read because they're fun and entertaining, and that's what this is. I adored Lady Lucy in this book. I actually think I preferred her to the character of Annabelle in book 1. There was something about her and the very strong-willed and independent-minded way that she has gone about living her life. And Tristan, what a redemption arc. When I started this book, I was a bit nervous because Tristan just seemed so unlikable, and I felt that I was just going to feel that Lady Lucy deserved so much better, but his redemption arc was chef's kiss. It was so good. By the end of it, I was like, marry me, Tristan. Like, I'm here. Hello. It was just so well done. This, unlike the Unhoneymooners, had a lot of steam, which I appreciated. I did give this 4 stars. I thought it was really enjoyable. I was rooting for Lucy and Tristan in the end. I really gave it 4 stars because I just wanted more. I wanted to see more of them, and so I'm hoping you again see them in the other books coming out in the series, because they will still be in that universe. But if you're just looking for a sweet, steamy romance to kind of cleanse your palate from something more on the more serious side, I would recommend. The last book that I want to talk about is actually the only book for the 12 Days of Bookmas readathon that I managed to finish by the end of December. And it is The Cellist of Sarajevo by Stephen Galloway, and this was the one that I read for the prompt on music, which I am blanking on what it was, and I believe for the dual POVs. The novel is based on a true story that occurred during the Bosnian War in the 90s, where on this one day, these civilians, I believe nearly 24 civilians, are killed by a bomb while standing in line waiting for bread, and this cellist decides to commemorate each of those lives by playing the cello in a square in Sarajevo. And the book itself looks at how these other individuals living during the conflict intersect with this cellist. This book is so short but so powerful because it is looking at everyday people going about their lives during the Bosnian War, and you are witnessing the trauma and tragedy of the experience. These are people who are risking their lives to go get fresh water, who are risking their lives just going to get bread, and that's commonplace. This is their reality, and they're grappling with it, and none of these people are soldiers. I think that's what struck me, is that all of these people are just civilians. At the end of the day, I gave this book 4 stars. I did feel like the writing was very beautiful, very touching. It stirred up all sorts of emotions in me, which I think is to the author's credit. It's bizarre to me to think about the fact that the Bosnian War was happening during my lifetime, and that I know so little about it because we really didn't study it in school. So this was a interesting way to learn more about the conflict. But if you're going to pick up this book, I'd just keep in mind that this is a book that is taking place in a war zone, so there is certainly triggering content here as far as violence and death. So I just want to put that caveat there for you. But it was beautiful and highly recommend it. So those are the 5 books that I read in the month of December, which means that this is the last wrap-up for 2020 books. Now we'll be moving onward to 2021. I do have to say that with the exception of the Unhoneymooners, that all of these books were 4 stars, which is a pretty phenomenal reading month for December, so I have no complaints there. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe if you aren't already. And I'll see you next time. Bye!